Chapter 1: The Collision. The music throbbed like a living pulse through the rooftop of the Lexington Grand, wrapping itself around laughter, clinking glasses, and the murmurs of the city below. Manhattan glowed beneath a canopy of stars and champagne haze. Every woman sparkled. Every man smelled of money. Sienna Moore tried not to look as lost as she felt. Her boyfriend, Connor Carter, had left her side the moment they arrived, swept up by colleagues, investors, and the charming performance of pretending to be someone he wasn't. She was his accessory tonight, the pretty face that proved he was serious enough to stand beside his father's empire. The truth was, she didn't belong here, not among people who said philanthropy like it was a sport. Her thrifted silver dress clung to her in all the wrong places. Her hands felt heavy holding the fragile glass. The skyline blurred when she turned her head too fast. The air smelled like money and roses. She needed space. Sienna drifted away from the chatter, letting the night wind kiss her shoulders. The railing glittered under fairy lights, and she took a deep breath. Finally, silence. Just her and the city. For a moment, she could pretend she wasn't invisible. Then it happened. A waiter brushed by, and her elbow jerked. The champagne flared out of the glass and splashed backward, onto a man's black suit. "Oh my God!" she gasped, turning around. The man stilled mid-sentence. He'd been speaking to a small group of investors, his hand resting on the back of an armchair like he owned it, and maybe he did. He looked down at the spreading stain on his jacket sleeve, then up at her. Sienna froze. He was older, mid-40s maybe, with a face that didn't need softening filters or apologies. Sharp jaw, steel gray eyes, that quiet, dangerous kind of calm that made everyone around him lean in. Lucas Carter. She didn't know it yet, but the name would soon rewrite everything. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I wasn't. I'll pay for the cleaning." Her voice stumbled over itself. His lips twitched. "You'd have to sell your soul to afford this suit." Her blush burned hotter than the champagne. "Right, of course. I'll just..." He plucked a napkin from a passing tray and dabbed absently at the spill, his eyes never leaving hers. The faintest smirk touched his mouth. "You look out of place here," he said. "You're not wrong," she admitted, unable to meet his gaze for long. "Then we have something in common." Her head lifted at that. For a second, the noise around them faded into a distant hum. His expression was unreadable, but his presence, his quiet confidence, was almost magnetic. A voice cut through the spell. "Mr. Carter, the board's waiting," said a young man in a headset. He turned slightly, nodded once, then looked back at her. "Try to avoid expensive accidents next time, Ms. Moore," she said quickly, her voice barely a whisper. He repeated it like he was tasting the word. "Ms. Moore." Then he walked away, steady, unhurried, leaving her alone with her thundering pulse and the faint scent of cedar and smoke lingering in the air. Sienna let out a shaky breath. Around her, the rooftop glittered, but she no longer saw it. "I didn't even know his name," she thought, "but I knew power when I felt it." And somewhere behind her, far across the ballroom, Connor was laughing with another woman. But Sienna didn't notice. Not yet. Chapter 2: A Night to Forget. The park still held a hint of autumn. Leaves rattled against the pavement. The fountain murmured to itself. Sienna stood at the edge of the path, phone clutched in her hand, watching the minute on her screen crawl past. Connor was late again. He was always late these days, but today she'd chosen to believe he would show up, that the smile he'd given her at the gala still meant something. A shout of laughter drifted across the street. She looked up, and her stomach dropped. Connor. He was leaning against the fountain rail, the late light gilding his hair, the expression on his face unguarded in a way it never was with her. The woman beside him tipped her head back, laughing, the sound soft and intimate. When he caught her hand and pulled her close, The moment snapped shut like a door. Sienna went cold. She didn't cry right away. She just stood there, hidden behind a lamppost, watching the easy way he kissed someone who wasn't her. Relax, he was saying, voice light and careless. Sienna's just convenient. Dad might not even know her face, but he likes that kind of image. That's all. Convenient. A word that could flatten a heart. She turned away before either of them could see her. The city blurred around her. Her heels clicked too fast on the pavement. By the time she reached the subway steps, she wasn't sure if the wet on her cheeks was rain or tears. The bar she stumbled into hours later was quiet enough that she could hear herself breathe. Amber light pooled over dark wood, and the low hum of a jazz guitar seemed to slow time itself. She sat down, ordered something she couldn't pronounce, and drank it too quickly. The second glass burned a little less. The third glass felt like permission to forget. "Rough night?" the bartender asked gently. Sienna gave a hollow laugh. "You could say that." He refilled her drink. Somewhere to her left, a man at the counter muttered a crude compliment, but she ignored him. When he moved closer, when his hand brushed her arm, she flinched. "Come on, sweetheart. Don't be like that." "I said no." She tried to stand, but the stool scraped too loudly, and the room spun. The man's fingers closed around her wrist. "Let go of me." The voice that answered didn't shout. It cut. "Let go." The pressure vanished. The drunk mumbled something and backed away. Every conversation in the bar stalled for a beat. Sienna turned toward the sound. Lucas Carter was there, framed by the warm light of the doorway, his expression unreadable. He looked like he belonged in another world entirely. Sleeves rolled, jaw set, eyes sharp with a kind of authority that didn't need volume. He spoke to the bartender quietly, and the man nodded, retreating. Then he looked back at her. "You again. You again," she managed, blinking hard. A laugh escaped her, thin and tired. "Do you make a habit of rescuing clumsy strangers?" "Only the ones who nearly drown in my bar." Her brow furrowed. "Your bar?" He inclined his head once. "Among other things." His gaze flicked to her glass. "Bad night. The worst." He considered that, then said, "Let's make sure it doesn't end worse." The bartender set a glass of water beside her. She tried to reach for her purse, but the motion tipped her forward. The floor tilted. The lights folded into one another. The last thing she felt was a steady hand at her back and the faint scent of cedar. When she woke, the world was made of quiet. Soft sheets, pale ceiling, the smell of coffee and linen. Her body felt weightless, her mind slow to catch up. Then she saw the skyline. Manhattan spread out beyond the glass, and panic kicked in. This wasn't her room. She sat up too fast. The duvet slipped down, revealing that she was wearing an oversized white shirt, sleeves rolled halfway up her arms. Her breath caught. "Oh my God!" she whispered. "Oh my God, oh my God." The door opened behind her. "Relax." Lucas stood there, perfectly composed, holding 2 mugs of coffee as though this was the most ordinary morning in the world. "You fainted," he said simply. "I didn't know where you lived, and I'm not in the habit of leaving unconscious women in cabs." She stared. Did you change my clothes?" He almost smiled. "My housekeeper did. I'm reckless, not suicidal." Her face flamed. "This is so embarrassing. It shouldn't be. You needed help. I helped." He crossed the room, set one cup on the nightstand, and offered the other to her. "You can trust me." Their fingers brushed as she took it. A small spark, no more than a heartbeat, but it jolted through her. She looked down at the coffee, pretending to be fascinated by the steam. "I should go," she murmured. "Finish your coffee first," he said, leaning lightly against the doorway. "You look like you might collapse again, and my carpet's imported." A reluctant laugh slipped out of her. He caught it and his eyes softened. "See," he said quietly. "Not the worst morning." She took a sip. It was strong, bitter, grounding. Outside, the city was waking up. Cars, sirens, a new day. Inside, everything felt suspended. A heartbeat caught between embarrassment and something she couldn't yet name. Lucas turned toward the window, speaking without looking at her. "There's a driver downstairs when you're ready. No rush." Sienna watched his reflection in the glass. The calm shoulders, the profile that looked carved from patience and power, and tried to steady her breath. It was ridiculous to feel anything. He was older, a stranger, and still, every second in that shirt felt indecent, as if the air itself knew a secret she didn't. She looked down at the mug in her hands, then up at him. "Thank you," she said softly. He glanced over his shoulder. "For the coffee? For not asking questions." Lucas smiled once, faintly. "Maybe I'm saving them for later." Her pulse stumbled again. Chapter 3. The Door That Shouldn't Open. The coffee in Sienna's hand trembled with the slight shake of her fingers. The apartment hummed with a polite, expensive quiet, the kind of silence curated by minimalism and money. Light poured across the floor in long, clean rectangles. Lucas had already disappeared into the background of the room, a silhouette at the window, and for a moment she let herself believe the morning would stay small and private, just two strangers sharing an odd kindness. Then a knock broke the hush, sharp, impatient, like someone who'd learned the world answered fastest to a raised voice. "Dad, are you here?" Connor's voice came through the door, close and familiar in a way that folded Sienna inward. Her grip tightened on the mug. Lucas frowned, the motion small but telling. He turned, and without looking directly at her he said, "Stay here." His voice wasn't unkind. It was a command softened by caution. He crossed to the door, palmed it, and opened it a crack. "Why?" he asked, more flat than curious. Connor pushed his way into the doorway, confidence on the verge of anger. "You didn't sign my promotion." "What the hell?" His words spilled out, sharp and entitled, the kind of complaint practiced until it sounded like demand. Something clicked in Sienna's chest. The tone, a memory, the way those syllables bent. She recognized the voice in an instant. Her stomach dropped in the slow, sick way betrayal always makes the world tilt. Lucas didn't look surprised. He answered coolly, the restraint of a man accustomed to keeping storms at bay. "Because you're still playing around." Sienna moved closer on instinct. Curiosity and dread braided into her steps. She couldn't help the small sound that escaped when Connor stepped fully into the room, and then he stopped. Everything in his face changed in a fraction of a second, like someone flipping a switch. "What the hell, Sienna? Honey, why are you in my father's room?" His voice split, part confusion, part accusation. The last word hung between them like glass. For a single suspended heartbeat, the apartment held only their breathing. Sienna felt the color drain away from her face as if her blood were slowly ebbing out. Lucas's brows rose, and the recognition that had been a slow, polite interest in the morning curdled into a harder thing. Understanding, edged with the professional caution of a man who saw consequences before anyone else did. "You're Connor's," Lucas began, the sentence a steady fact. "Not anymore." Sienna said it before she could stop herself. Too fast, too bright with something that wanted to hurt. The words jagged from her like glass. Connor's expression changed in an instant. The thin skin of civility tore and anger bled through. "You slept with him?" he said, a savage little thing, half demand and half a test. "No. I..." Sienna began instinctively because she wanted to be honest, because the claim was absurd, because denying it felt like proof. But then something like shame and fury rose so hot it pushed the sensible out of her mouth. How dare he, she thought, tasting the bitter. "You know what? Maybe I did." The sentence came out harsher than she intended, an ugly, delicious spite that landed where it was aimed. She hated that the words sounded small and triumphant at the same time. Connor's jaw clenched. He flung a look at Lucas that could have been a physical strike. "You took her from me," he spat, the accusation both childish and cruel. Lucas's voice dropped to a low, controlled register. "I didn't." The unfinished sentence trembled with something like denial, like a man trying to stop a misinterpreted future before it began. He didn't elaborate. There was no need. The lie or the truth in that fragment would be filled later by everyone else's versions. Connor's face twisted. Hurt, fury, entitlement all mashed into one grotesque expression, and he pushed past them. The door slammed behind him with a violence that rattled the glass. Sienna flinched at the sound, covering her face as if she could hide from what she'd said. The room felt suddenly too small, the air too thin. "Jesus," she whispered, muffled through her palms. "I shouldn't have said that." Lucas's tone was sharper than before. "Why did you?" The question wasn't purely curiosity. It was calculation. Men like Lucas cataloged motive like assets, useful in business, dangerous in life. Sienna pushed her hands away and looked up, eyes stinging. "I wanted to hurt him," she admitted, and there was a brittle honesty in it that surprised her. She'd wanted to win, even if winning meant burning bridges. "You asked for trouble?" Lucas said, and there was no mockery in it, only steady, relentless reality. He moved toward her, not menacingly but with an impulse to take inventory, to measure the damage. Up close, she could see the slight furrow by his temple. The way his mouth was a line that didn't relax easily. "Did it work?" she asked, voice small and raw, the question more to herself than to him. "Too well," he answered quietly, then softer, almost regretful. "Now you've dragged both of us into something we can't undo." The words landed like a verdict, between shame and anger and something dangerously like a thrill. Sienna felt a complicated heat coil in her chest. Guilt, adrenaline, and an inexplicable, reckless relief that at least the quiet was broken. The reckless part of her, the one fueled by betrayal and humiliation, wanted to lean into whatever came next. The sensible part wanted to run. Lucas turned away for a second, more to gather his bearings than to hide anything. Sienna watched his back, the clean slope of his shoulders. For a fleeting, ridiculous moment she wondered what he thought of the shirt she'd worn to sleep, whether he saw it as a happy accident or a breach of decorum. He came back with 2 napkins in his hand, offered one without ceremony. "You should probably get dressed," he said, practical. "And be careful who you try to hurt. Revenge is a currency with a high interest rate." Sienna took the napkin, the paper soft and oddly grounding between her fingers. She looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time since the gala she felt the pull of whatever Lucas was. Not just money or power, but a steadiness that could be mistaken for safety. Chapter 4. The Arrangement. 3 days had passed. 3 quiet, caffeine-soaked, ordinary days. The clatter of cups and hiss of the espresso machine filled the small 24-hour coffee shop where Sienna worked as an assistant manager. The smell of roasted beans and warm milk had become her comfort, her way of proving that she could rebuild, that the world hadn't ended just because one man had broken her heart and another had made it skip for all the wrong reasons. She told herself she was fine, that the past few days had been nothing more than a bad dream. The morning rush didn't care about heartbreak. The regulars only cared about their caffeine. When she clocked in, the first thing she noticed was the stack of newspapers near the counter, each one smudged with fingerprints and gossip. Her coworker Jamie, a college kid with too much energy and not enough tact, whistled low. "Man, people are savage," he said, flipping a paper around so she could see. It took her a moment to understand what she was looking at. Her own face stared back from the front page, a grainy photo of her at the gala beside Lucas Carter, the billionaire who could probably buy this entire city block without blinking. The headline screamed, "Mystery Woman Linked to Lucas Carter Scandal." Her heart stopped. She wasn't a mystery woman. She wasn't anybody. The article went on wild speculations about an affair, about her influence on one of New York's most powerful men. Words like heiress and social climber jumped out at her, and she nearly laughed at how far off the mark they were. She was poor, broke really. Her rent was late, her shoes had holes, and her paycheck barely covered groceries. Her fingers shook. This isn't real," she whispered, though the headline stared back stubbornly, daring her to deny it. Customers were already staring. Whispers pricked the air. She didn't remember clocking out, just Jamie's confused look as she muttered something about being sick and walked out into the cold morning. Outside, she leaned against a brick wall, trying to steady her breath. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Unknown numbers, texts from people she barely knew. "Is that you? Are you seriously dating him? Girl, is this true?" Her pulse raced. Her throat felt tight. Then a black car slid to a stop at the curb. Sleek, expensive, wrong in every way against the cracked sidewalk and the chipped paint of the cafe. A man stepped out, Lucas's butler, dressed in an immaculate suit that looked wildly out of place in front of her coffee shop. "Miss Moore." His voice was gentle but firm. She blinked, dazed. "Yes. Mr. Carter asked me to bring you to him." She shook her head immediately. "No, whatever this is, I'm not part of it. Tell him I don't need his help." The butler hesitated, then said quietly, "Please, it's important." She didn't know why she got in the car. Maybe because everything had already gone wrong. Maybe because her name was already being dragged through the mud. Or maybe because a part of her, against all reason, wanted to see him again. The penthouse was the same as she remembered. Glass, steel, and silence. Manhattan stretched endlessly beyond the windows, the city looking smaller from here, like it belonged to someone else entirely. Lucas was standing by the window, phone in hand, his expression unreadable. He looked impossibly composed, but there was tension in the way his jaw set when he turned to face her. "You've seen the papers," he said, voice steady but tight. Sienna let out a humorless laugh. "Kind of hard to miss when your face is in the front page." "I'm sorry you found out that way," he said. She crossed her arms. "So you knew. I was trying to contain it before you did." "Contain?" she repeated, her voice rising. "Someone just called me a gold digger and a homewrecker in print. How exactly were you planning to contain that?"
Lucas sighed.
"Connor's friends started it. It spread fast. He wanted to hurt me, and it looks like he succeeded." Her mouth went dry. "Connor," he hesitated, then nodded. "He told people I was involved with you, that I stole you from him." Sienna felt the air leave her lungs. "He did this?" "I'm afraid so." For a long time she couldn't speak. The betrayal was old, but it still had new ways of stinging. Lucas stepped closer, voice quieter now. "I know this isn't fair to you, but I have a business empire at stake. Investors are nervous. My PR team's in panic mode." "I'm sure they'll live," she muttered, trying to hold onto some dignity. "They won't," he said dryly, "which is why they suggested a temporary cover story, to control the narrative." She gave him a wary look. "What kind of cover story?" "That you're my personal assistant," he said simply. "It'll explain why you were seen with me. It gives the tabloids nothing else to feed on." Her jaw dropped. "You want me to pretend to work for you?" He met her gaze evenly. "Not pretend. You'll actually work for me. 2 months, maybe less. I'll pay you 1 year of your current salary up front." She stared at him, stunned. "That's insane." "It's practical," he countered. "You need protection and I need damage control. It's mutually beneficial." Her lips parted in disbelief. "You think money fixes everything, don't you?" "No," he said, calm as ever. "But it buys time." She wanted to be angry, but the truth was, she didn't have time. Her landlord had already threatened eviction. Her paycheck barely covered food. The idea of 2 months' work equaling a year's pay was dizzying. And maybe, just maybe, she didn't want to walk away from him yet. That night, her small suitcase sat by the polished marble floor of Lucas's penthouse. The view outside glittered with city lights, mocking, mesmerizing. "This feels like a bad idea," she said, watching him pour himself a glass of water. "It probably is," he replied without missing a beat. The apartment was too quiet. Their footsteps echoed in it. He showed her to the guest room, modern, elegant, impersonal. "You'll have privacy here," he said. She nodded. "Right? Because that's exactly what this looks like, privacy." Later, she found him in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, cooking something that smelled too expensive for comfort food. The sight of him barefoot, chopping vegetables under soft light, was disorienting. "You cook," she said, more statement than question. "Sometimes," he replied. "It keeps me human." "Do you always feed your fake assistants?" "Only the ones with headlines," he said, glancing up. "Sit. You need to eat." She hesitated, but hunger and curiosity won. When he handed her a plate, their fingers brushed, just for a second, enough to feel the current. "Thank you," she said softly. He studied her for a moment. "You don't have to thank me, Sienna. I started this mess too." Their eyes met, neither willing to look away. The elevator dinged in the distance, a reminder that the world still existed outside this strange, fragile piece. "Good night, Ms. Moore," he said finally, voice low. "Good night, Mr. Carter." When she closed the door to her room, her pulse hadn't slowed. Days blurred together. Morning coffees, polite exchanges, late-night glances that lasted too long. The tension was quiet, but constant, like gravity. Sienna told herself she was safe. Lucas told himself he was in control. Both were lying. Chapter 5: The Pull of the Forbidden. The following week unfolded like a slow, dangerous dance. The tabloids had begun to cool, just enough for the city to find new gossip, but inside Lucas Carter's penthouse, tension simmered beneath the quiet. The world might have stopped watching, but they were still trapped in the same frame. Sienna woke early every morning, determined to prove she was more than a scandal headline. She handled phone calls, scheduled meetings, arranged deliveries, and tried very hard not to notice that Lucas always seemed to be watching her when she worked, and that his gaze wasn't the gaze of a boss. The first time it happened, she was carrying a stack of files to his study. He was on the phone, voice low and commanding, the kind that made people say yes before they even understood the question. His jacket was off, his sleeves rolled, the morning light tracing the veins in his forearms. When he saw her waiting by the door, he motioned for her to enter. "Hold on," he said into the phone, then pressed mute. "You can leave them here." She stepped forward, careful to keep her composure. But the space between them felt too charged, too small. As she leaned down to place the files on his desk, her hair brushed his arm. Neither of them moved. He smelled like cedar and coffee and something faintly electric. Control. When she finally straightened, he was already watching her, eyes unreadable. "You're good at this," he said after a pause. "At what?" she asked, flustered. He tilted his head slightly. "Pretending you're not angry." The words hit too close. "I'm not pretending." "Then you're lying," he said, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. She wanted to argue, but she couldn't. So she did what she'd been doing since she met him. She walked away before he could see how deeply he affected her. That night, she found him in the kitchen again, still in his dress shirt, tie loosened. He was pouring a drink when she entered. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, eyes flicking toward her oversized t-shirt and shorts. "Too much coffee," she said, avoiding his gaze. He handed her a glass of water, the simple gesture carrying too much weight. Their fingers brushed, again, and this time neither pulled away. For a moment it was like the whole world narrowed to that single point of contact. His hand lingered just a second too long. She looked up, and their eyes met. His steady, hers unguarded. "Lucas," she began, voice unsteady. He exhaled sharply and stepped back, as if catching himself before gravity could finish what temptation started. "This isn't a good idea," he said, almost to himself. "I didn't say it was," she replied softly. He looked at her then, not like a scandal, not like a problem to solve, but like something he'd been trying not to want for far too long. "You should get some sleep," he said finally, the edge in his voice betraying the restraint it took to say it. "So should you," she whispered. When she turned to leave, he caught her wrist gently, thumb brushing the inside of her pulse. His voice was quiet, rough. "Be careful with me, Sienna." She swallowed hard. "You say that like I'm the dangerous one." He smiled, barely. "You are." The days that followed became a rhythm of near confessions and almost touches. At business dinners, she sat beside him, pretending not to feel his hand brush against hers under the table. When she helped him with his tie one evening before a gala, her fingers trembled. His breath fanned against her temple, too close, too deliberate. "You're shaking," he murmured. "Am I?" she said, her voice barely audible. He smiled faintly. "You don't have to be nervous." "I'm not," she lied. "Liar," he said again, softer this time. Her hands froze. For a long moment, neither moved. Then she stepped back quickly, pretending to fuss with the knot. "There," she said, too fast. "Done." He looked at her, eyes dark with something unspoken. "Perfect." The word wasn't about the tie. That night, she dreamed of him. His voice, the feel of his hands when he handed her coffee, the way he always left the door to his study slightly open, as if waiting for her to step inside. She woke before dawn, heart racing, the city outside still asleep. When she walked into the living room, she found him sitting by the window, half-dressed, hair disheveled, the light from his laptop casting shadows over his face. He looked up, startled, as if she'd caught him in something private. "You're up early," she said. "Couldn't sleep," he murmured. They both smiled at the irony. For a while they said nothing, just the hum of the city below them and the steady rhythm of their breathing filling the space. It should have been innocent. It wasn't. There was a kind of intimacy in silence, a pull neither of them could deny anymore. And though neither crossed the line that night, both knew they were standing right at its edge. Later that night, long after she'd gone to bed, Lucas stayed by the window, staring at the skyline until the city began to pale with morning. The coffee in his hand had gone cold hours ago. He'd built an empire out of discipline, every decision, every risk, measured and precise. But this wasn't something he could manage with logic. He ran a hand through his hair and let out a quiet, humorless laugh. "What the hell are you doing, Carter? She's half your age. She was your son's girlfriend." The words echoed like accusations he didn't need anyone else to say out loud. He closed his eyes, the guilt pressing against his chest like a weight. She reminded him of a part of himself he'd buried, the part that still believed in something tender, something unguarded. And that terrified him more than scandal ever could. He could still see her in his mind, standing in the kitchen light, barefaced, earnest, trying to act like she didn't belong there when she clearly did. His throat tightened. "You don't want her," he told himself. "You want peace. She just looks like it." But the lie didn't hold. Not when her laughter still lingered in the back of his head, soft and uninvited. He turned off the light, the room slipping into darkness. Outside, the city kept moving, merciless, awake, indifferent. He'd spent his whole life mastering control. Now, for the first time, he wasn't sure he wanted to. Chapter 6. The distance between us. The week began with a flight, first class, quiet, far too close. Lucas's company had scheduled back-to-back meetings in Chicago and San Francisco, and his assistant naturally had to come along. Sienna told herself it was just work, that she could handle sitting beside him for 7 days straight, breathing the same air, pretending her pulse didn't race every time his sleeve brushed hers. But desire wasn't the hardest part. Restraint was. The private car that picked them up from the airport was all tinted glass and leather, humming softly with luxury. Sienna sat stiffly, clutching her tablet like it was a lifeline, while Lucas scrolled through emails beside her. "Don't overwork yourself," she murmured without thinking. He looked up, brow raised. "What makes you think I do?" She gave him a small smile. "Because your phone buzzes more than your heart does." The silence that followed was unexpected, warm, thoughtful. For a second, he almost smiled. "You might be the first person to say that to me." "Then maybe you need to hear it," she replied softly. He didn't answer, but his hand relaxed on his lap, the tension in his shoulders fading for the first time all day. Each city blurred into the next. Meetings, client dinners, polite handshakes that meant nothing. But the moments in between, those were what neither of them could forget. In hotel elevators, their reflections stood too close, their eyes meeting in mirrored doors. In long car rides, his arm brushed against hers when he reached for coffee. At dinners, he caught her watching him, and she pretended she wasn't. And at night, when they returned to their separate rooms, the silence on the other side of the wall was unbearable. It was on the fourth night, somewhere between exhaustion and confession, that the distance between them finally turned fragile. The suite was quiet. Lucas had been on calls all day, his voice low, sharp, commanding. When she returned from the adjoining room to drop off reports, she found him on the couch, half asleep, tie undone, head tilted back. For once, he didn't look like a billionaire. He just looked tired, human. She stood there for a long time, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest. The man who commanded boardrooms and headlines suddenly seemed small, almost breakable. She moved quietly, pulling the hotel blanket over his shoulders. As she leaned down, her fingers brushed the edge of his jaw, rough with stubble, warm under her touch. His breath hitched. And then his hand shot up, catching her wrist before she could pull away. "If you keep touching me like that," he murmured, voice low, gravel-edged, still half in dreams, "I won't stop this time." Her heart hammered. Every inch of her skin buzzed with electricity. "Then don't," she whispered. His eyes opened, dark and conflicted. For a moment, it felt like the world had stopped spinning. Then, with visible effort, he let go of her wrist. His voice was quiet, almost pained. "Sienna." She stepped back, pulse unsteady, whispering, "Good night, Mr. Carter." He watched her disappear into the bedroom. Neither of them slept that night. The next morning, the air between them felt different, charged, careful, almost tender. They shared coffee without a word. She caught him watching her reflection in the window. He caught her pretending not to notice. Later, during a quiet car ride to the next meeting, he finally spoke. "You think I'm cold," he said suddenly. She turned, surprised. "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." His gaze stayed on the passing skyline. "Connor thinks it too. That I don't care." Sienna hesitated. "Do you?" His hands tightened around his phone. "I had him when I was 21. I wasn't ready. His mother wanted stability. I wanted freedom, and neither of us got what we wanted." He exhaled, the confession rough and honest. "I built an empire because I didn't know how to build a home. And now I don't know how to fix what's left." Her heart softened. She'd never heard him sound like this, unguarded. "Maybe you don't have to fix everything," she said gently. Maybe you just have to start being there. He looked at her then, really looked, eyes tracing her face as if her words had landed somewhere deep. That's what scares me, he admitted. Being there. Because I know how it feels to be disappointed by the person you depend on. I don't want Connor to feel that way about me. Sienna's chest ached. But he already does, she said softly. The truth hung heavy in the air. He nodded once, resigned. Yeah, he does. That night she couldn't sleep again. She kept replaying his words, the quiet sadness behind them. Lucas Carter wasn't just rich and powerful, he was lonely. And maybe that was what drew her in more than anything else. He didn't need saving, but she couldn't stop wanting to reach for him anyway. In the dim hotel room, her phone buzzed. A message from the room next door. Lucas, are you awake? She stared at the screen, heart racing. Sienna. Yeah. The 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Lucas. Good night. She smiled faintly, typing back. Good night, Mr. Carter. She didn't know when she fell asleep, only that she dreamed of his hand still on her wrist, of the warmth he fought to deny, and the distance that was slowly breaking them both. Chapter 7. The Fallout, the Ring, and the Reckoning. The night air outside the penthouse was warm, but inside, it felt too still, like the city itself was holding its breath. Lucas stood by the window staring at the skyline. Below him, the city pulsed with life. Cars, lights, people who didn't know that the man looking down at them would trade everything he owned just to feel normal again. Behind him, the soft sound of footsteps. Sienna. She'd come to give him the last of the reports from their business trip, but when she saw him standing there, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, eyes distant, she hesitated. Something in the set of his shoulders told her this wasn't about business. You missed dinner, she said softly. He turned, offering a faint smile. I wasn't hungry. You've said that every night this week. He looked at her for a long moment, then sighed. You make it hard to lie. She stepped closer, then stopped trying. The air shifted. He watched her approach, the way her hair caught the soft light, the way she looked at him not with judgment or fear, but with quiet understanding. No one had ever looked at him like that, not even Connor's mother. He reached for her hand before he could stop himself. Their fingers tangled naturally, like they'd done it 1,000 times before. Sienna, he said quietly, you've turned my life upside down. Her breath caught. Is that a bad thing? His thumb brushed her palm, slow, reverent. No. It's the first thing that's felt real in years. He stepped closer. She didn't move away. Do you know what you've done to me? He asked, voice low, almost breaking. You made me want to feel again, to want things I shouldn't. Then want them, she whispered. Want me. That was all it took. He cupped her face, hesitating for the barest heartbeat, then kissed her. It wasn't hungry or desperate. It was slow, searching, the kind of kiss that felt like a confession. Her hands slid up his chest, curling into his shirt. He deepened the kiss slightly, but then pulled back, resting his forehead against hers. I shouldn't, he whispered. But you did, she breathed, eyes shining. He smiled, small, sad, sincere. God help me, I did. For a moment the world felt right, simple. He didn't tell her that the next morning, he'd gone out and bought a ring. Not out of guilt or impulse, but with clarity. For once, he knew what he wanted, and what he wanted was her. Not the image, not the comfort, her laugh, her stubbornness, her soft defiance. He planned to propose once her name was cleared, once the world stopped watching. It was supposed to be private, quiet, real, but fate didn't care for timing. It was late that evening when Connor entered his father's study. He hadn't bothered knocking, he never did. Lucas was in a meeting, and the room was empty except for the faint scent of his cologne and the open drawer on his desk. Inside it, a small velvet box. Connor picked it up, curiosity curdling into rage as soon as he opened it. The diamond caught the light, bright and cruel. When Lucas finally walked in, Connor was standing there, holding the box like evidence of betrayal. "You'd give her what you never gave me," Connor said, his voice shaking. "A name that mattered." Lucas froze. His face didn't harden. It softened, guilt flickering in his eyes. "Connor." "No," Connor snapped. "Don't Connor me. You ignored me my whole life. You couldn't even look at me without remembering your mistakes. But now you want to play happy family with her." Lucas exhaled slowly. "You're angry. I'm destroyed." Connor cut him off, voice breaking. "You took everything. You were never there. Not when Mom left. Not when I graduated. You didn't even call when I started working for you. You had HR onboard me like I was any other stranger." Lucas's voice dropped low. "Because I didn't want you to think you had to earn my approval to belong, Connor." "Then maybe you should have told me that," Connor shot back, eyes wet. "Instead, you made me chase it for years." Lucas's throat tightened. For once, he didn't have an answer, only silence. Connor's jaw trembled as he slammed the box shut. "You'd marry the girl I loved just to spit in my face?" Lucas's voice was quiet, raw. "No. I'd marry her because I finally learned what love looks like." The words landed like a strike. Connor flinched, his rage shifting into disbelief. "You don't get to be happy," he said bitterly. "Not after you've destroyed everyone else's chance at it." Then he turned, shoving the door open so hard it rattled. The echo of it closing was louder than any scream. Lucas stood there long after his son had gone. The ring box sat in his palm, small, heavy, shining mockingly in the low light. His reflection in the glass behind the desk looked like a stranger, a man who'd built everything except peace. He whispered to no one, "For the first time in my life, I want something I can't buy." The next morning, Sienna found him in the study, staring at nothing. "You didn't come to bed," she said softly. He looked at her, his eyes hollow but resolute. "Sienna," he said, his tone controlled, rehearsed, distant. Her stomach dropped. "What's wrong?" "The contract's over," he said quietly. "You'll get the rest of your payment today." She blinked. "What?" "It's better this way. For you. For Connor." She stepped forward, voice trembling. "Lucas, don't do this." He looked away. "I have to." "Why?" she demanded, her eyes burning. "Because he's my son," he said, finally looking at her again. "And I've already failed him enough times. I can't take what little peace he has left." Her throat closed. "And what about my peace?" He didn't answer. He just turned, running a hand through his hair, breaking in every way except visibly. "Goodbye, Sienna," he said, voice barely audible. She stood there for a long time after he walked out, hands shaking, heart breaking, realizing that love wasn't always about holding on. Sometimes it was about surviving the silence that came after. Chapter 8. The Choice to Love. The city had begun to thaw by the time Sienna walked away from Carter Enterprises. No headlines, no drama, just a quiet resignation letter slid across an assistant's desk. No one asked why she left, and she didn't explain. She simply stepped out into the sunlight and promised herself she wouldn't look back. For a while, she kept that promise. 2 months passed. Lucas Carter had done what he'd always done best, work. But for the first time in his life, the work wasn't about empire or profit. It was about atonement. He called Connor every few days, no agenda, no business, just calls that started awkwardly and ended in silence. He invited him to lunch once a week. Sometimes Connor showed up, sometimes he didn't. But Lucas stayed consistent. He was done giving up on people just because it was easier. Each apology was small, imperfect, sometimes met with nothing but a nod. But piece by piece, a bridge began to rebuild. One gray afternoon, Connor appeared at his father's office without an appointment. He didn't look angry anymore, just tired, grown. Lucas set down the document he'd been pretending to read. "Connor, don't look so surprised," Connor said, hands in his pockets. "You've been calling long enough. I figured you'd wear me down eventually." Lucas smiled faintly. "Persistence is one of my few virtues." There was an uneasy quiet. Then Connor walked to the desk, eyes catching on the open drawer. The ring box was still there, untouched, unoffered. He hesitated, then picked it up. "You didn't give it to her." Lucas leaned back in his chair, voice low. "It wasn't time." Connor opened the box, staring at the diamond that had once been meant for someone he loved too. "Maybe now it is," he said quietly. Lucas looked at him, surprised. Connor's voice softened. "You've been trying, Dad. I see it. You're not the same man you were before." "I've got a lot to make up for," Lucas admitted. "Then start with her," Connor said. "Don't waste another chance like you did with me." He set the ring box back on the desk and walked toward the door. But before he left, he added, without turning around, "I don't hate you anymore. That's a start, right?" Lucas's throat tightened. "That's everything." The bell above the cafe door chimed softly, the familiar sound that had marked every beginning and ending in Sienna Moore's life. Steam curled from the espresso machine, the air thick with the smell of roasted beans and cinnamon. The hum of quiet chatter filled the small space, students tapping away on laptops, couples sharing pastries, the same regulars who still smiled when she handed them their morning coffee. Sienna was back where it all began. Assistant manager, worn apron, tired hands. But this time she wasn't running from anything. She'd made peace with the quiet. At least she thought she had, until she looked up and saw him. Lucas Carter stood just inside the doorway, every bit as composed and devastatingly magnetic as the first time she'd spilled champagne on his suit. Only now, he wasn't surrounded by board members or bodyguards. Just him. Hands in his pockets, eyes searching for hers like a man who'd finally stopped pretending he wasn't lost. For a moment, the cafe seemed to still. "Lucas," she breathed, before she could stop herself. He smiled faintly. "You still remember my name." She folded her arms, heart pounding. "Hard to forget the man who turned my life upside down." "I'd say we managed that for each other," he said gently. There was a pause, soft, heavy, familiar. She gestured toward the counter. "Coffee? Please. Whatever you recommend." She busied herself behind the bar, grateful for the distraction. But her fingers trembled slightly as she poured, the steam from the espresso machine blurring her reflection in the glass. When she turned back, he was closer, leaning on the counter, eyes soft. "Connor told me to come," he said. Her brows lifted. "Connor?" He nodded. "We've been talking." Slowly. "He's stubborn, but so was I." His smile faltered, replaced by something quieter. "He saw the ring in my drawer. Told me not to waste another chance." Her breath caught. "The ring." He reached into his coat pocket and placed the velvet box on the counter between them. "I was waiting for the right time. Then I realized there's no such thing." Sienna stared at it, her throat tight. "Lucas." He took a deep breath. "I'm not here to fix anything, or to make promises I don't deserve to make. I just know that for the first time in my life, I don't want to build something without someone beside me." He pushed the cup of coffee closer to her, the one she'd just made for him. "You used to tell me coffee could tell you a lot about a person." She smiled faintly, blinking away tears. "And what does yours say?" "That I still need you to teach me," he murmured. She laughed softly, shaking her head. "You're impossible. And you're unforgettable," he said simply. He slid the box toward her and opened it. The diamond sparkled against the dark wood of the counter. Not as a grand gesture, but as a quiet truth. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said. "I'm asking for forever." Her hands covered her mouth, tears spilling freely now. "Forever," she whispered, her voice trembling. "That's a long time, Mr. Carter." He smiled, eyes glinting. "Then let's not waste another second." Sienna laughed through her tears, shaking her head. "You really think a ring and a cup of coffee can fix everything?" He leaned in slightly, voice warm.
No.
"But maybe a kiss can start to." She didn't make him wait. When their lips met, it was gentle, not rushed or desperate, but earned. A kiss that tasted of coffee, salt, and second chances. His hand cupped her cheek. Hers curled into his collar, the world outside the cafe dissolving into light. When they finally pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his chest. "You know, you still owe me for that ruined suit," Lucas said, laughing. Sienna smiled sweetly. "Then I guess I'll be paying for the rest of my life." That evening, as the cafe closed and the last customers drifted out, Sienna locked the door and turned off the lights. Outside, the city glowed neon and golden, alive. Inside, the faint smell of coffee lingered, mingled with something new, peace. Lucas wrapped his arms around her from behind, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I used to think love made you weak," he murmured. She turned in his arms, smiling. "And now I know it's the only thing strong enough to save me."
If you like this video, please like and subscribe.